theme of the day has been innovation, and we've heard about innovation in many different areas, but I can't think of any one area where innovation and the exciting new possibilities that come with innovation touch the lives of everybody in this room, everybody outside this room, everybody everywhere in the world. Healthcare, we've, even in the past few years, seen the possibilities of innovation. We've seen the innovation take on massive challenges, none bigger than the COVID pandemic, but plenty of other things. And we have an amazing panel that can unpack the possibilities and the potential of some of that innovation. Nisa, I'll start with you because you come to this from the investor's perspective. There's so much going on in so many areas within the healthcare field. As an investor, how do you make the decision how do you choose? How do you choose where, first of all, how do you know where to look, and then how do you choose where to invest?
Thanks, Bobby. I think, it's I've been involved with healthcare investment for the last 18 years, and it's great to see the development we've seen in the last, 15, 20 years and so forth. At the beginning, we would be looking at potentially areas that, when we first started in China and investing in areas where there's no Medtronic, there's no Pfizer and whatnot. So how do we provide basic services and care and drugs and devices to China? And as we continue to grow in the last 10 years, we started looking at innovation from all over the world. And we think about how do we use technology? How do we use the next dimensions of life science tools and whatnot to actually help our research institutions to develop beyond? So, we are one of the early investors in AI drug discovery, starting with the investment in Schrödinger in New York. And we were also angel investor in Recursion out of Salt Lake City, and then followed by in silico and so forth. So, what's really interesting is now we're able to use AI to identify target and use AI to develop molecular structure. And now we have drugs in phase 2 clinical in US, with a pipeline of another 13 drugs in the pipeline, focus on unmet medical needs that previously we were not able to develop on our own. So now beyond that, we've actually started looking into, and we recently invested in a company. We're thinking, since we have so many targets coming out from AI, assets, we can't continue to rely on animal studies. That would be the bottleneck. So how can we use technology to combat that? So we recently invested in a spin-off from Harvard Medical School, WIS Institute, organs on a chip. So every chip is a different organ, including liver, that would test toxicity and so forth. So we're always thinking 5, 10, 20 years from now, what do we need?
And of course, this also greatly accelerates the process. If you don't have to do animal testing, there's the political dimension, there's a social dimension, there's an ecological dimension, but there's also the dimension of just blinding speed that you can achieve if you don't have to think about animals.
Yes, exactly. So, but of course we would tell our AI drug discovery companies, maybe the first drug will not work, maybe the second drug will not, but if we can shorten the time it takes to identify the target, if we can have a better accuracy for these drugs, then that would reduce the cost of drug discovery and development a lot. Now, at the same time, I think, one of the things that we really like to see is, besides DNA sequencing, one of the areas, proteomics, is an area that we're also quite involved. So one of our companies out of Fremont, California, is the leading proteomics protein sequencing. So all of a sudden, instead of just looking at our DNA, we're looking at the 20,000, 30,000 proteins in our body, and how can we identify drugs a lot better and faster. And this includes neurological drugs, drugs focused on neurology and neuroscience that we previously were not able to develop.
And Andre, we were talking about proteins just before this discussion, so I know you will have something to add to that. But Flagship is unusual in that it's not an investor in other companies, it creates companies. It's a company that creates other companies. So you face a similar kind of challenge, but in a different way. How do you identify, again, in this big sort of spectrum of different possibilities, how do you identify where you want to put down your money and your intellectual capital, and where you want to set up a new company. The Moderna example may be one place to start.
Yeah, very happy to. So Flagship Pioneering is basically not a venture capital firm in the traditional sense, because we invest only in our own companies, in everything that comes out from the flagship labs. Now the question is, what comes out there and how do we approach it? And here, I think, first of all, it starts with the aspiration. We have a process, it's called the pioneering process, and within that very core is the emerging discovery process. And I will explain. So the pioneering process allows us to create first-in-class multi-product bioplatform companies with the potential to transform human and planetary health. And we usually look at distant white spaces where there is nobody, so we have a competitive advantage where there is big potential, and if it works, we are basically there. We do that with a very disciplined process, and we call that emergent discovery, with so-called what-if questions. So we basically go future back and simply try to imagine a state, what if, let's say Moderna's example, if the human can produce drugs in the body that helps, or even more specifically, if we can use mRNA platform to create miniature drug factories in the cells of the human. That was the original question of Moderna in 2010, and it was not even vaccine-based. It was in general for vaccines and therapeutics. And then basically we do iterations. We use the Darwinian law of natural evolution, of variant generation and selection. And very quickly we see that out of every year we have 100 of these questions. About 15 of them, if they graduate to so-called protocol companies, where we continue with the experiments. And if that works, that's where a new company is found. And that is being then continued to grow and become successful. So in terms of numbers, 100 explorations, 10 to 15 proto companies per year, about 6 to 8 companies are created.
Every year?
Every year. And Flagship, with this approach, has created 100 billion, or depending on valuations, up to 100 billion of aggregate value, 100 companies, with a committed own capital of 6.8 billion and about 28 billion from outside, at the later stage that comes. And I think the important thing is we try to be very factual in the sense, so we do the killer analysis early, and even the companies in the protocol stage and early newco stage don't have a name, they have a number, just to avoid personal attachment.
Yeah. And so, Dan, your company comes in the therapeutics stage, for want of a better expression, you're in the middle of the science of it. You're in the middle of taking all this potential and making magic in the laboratory that we can all pin our hopes to. Talk us through a little bit about your process and the innovation that you're bringing to this sort of sequence of events: investor, company creation, and the lab.
Huma is all about accelerating adoption of digital and AI in the world of care and research. And this is really important because when you look into traditional medical work, research work, and science, it's hard to access everybody quickly. And we believe with digital and technology, you can touch everybody in a very consistent, cost-effective way. And that is why everything we do as a company, we want to be able to deliver it through a device like this, whether it is supporting you to be screened or diagnosed for cardiovascular disease, which is something that we have rolled out in the US a few months ago, and then 2 weeks ago we did it nationwide in Saudi together with our partner Bayer, to supporting a patient that goes through a complex cancer treatment and ensuring that that patient is the most optimized version of itself, obviously receiving different type of treatments, drugs, and so on. And we are more into managing the symptoms, the side effects, and keeping you really the best version of yourself as you go through this. Now, we believe with these new AI models being invented and being basically introduced to the world, we can make the care delivery almost consistent around the world. The same way that if you have a smartphone and it's some sort of internet connectivity, the poorest persons in the world to the richest persons in the world, as long as you have the device, you can have access to the same Google map, takes you from A to B exactly the same way. And we have achieved that already, obviously, in the context of map. And we think we can deliver that in the context of healthcare. And then the work that Flagship Pioneering, Nisa, and the team they're doing are really supportive of obviously enabling that vision, because we are more into the care pathway management rather than inventing the drug itself.
Yes, yeah, I should have been clear about that. A laboratory no longer has to be thought of as a sort of where biology is done. Yes. Data crunching is as much, and the use of AI is as much a part of this process now than as a medical lab. And then, Samer, you are where the rubber meets the road. Bayer. I mean, Bayer is a full spectrum company, but you are where you are in the delivery end of this process. With your role, you cover 56 countries, very different countries, and different challenges in the delivery. What, in the delivery end of it, what are the innovations that you are encountering, that you are using now, that help you get to past that last mile and into the village, the home, the family, to deliver the medicines, the therapies, the cures?
Well, thank you so much, Bobby. Probably the first thing that crossed my mind as you speak is something one of the former German chancellors said. Willy Brandt said, if I'm selling you, I speak your language. If I'm buying, dann müssen Sie Deutsch sprechen. Then you have to speak German, right? It all comes to really how are you going to talk to the customer eventually, and what is the best route to get to that place. Bayer has a very nice, relevant vision and mission statement. It's health for all, hunger for none. And this translates to the global health unit that I had into fostering inclusive growth. And with these 55+ countries that are in the low and middle income countries, we are anyway in an economic forum. I want to tell you one statistic. Imagine I tell you there is somewhere you can spend or invest $1 and it's going to get back to you 120. In 1994, the Copenhagen Conference estimate said, if you spend $1 on female contraception in low-middle-income countries, it comes back with a total utility benefit for the society with 120. If you would put $1,000 in a bank, you will get 120,000. So, Bayer, keeping that in mind, we try, for example, to focus on the area of family planning. Think of an example of India, a low-middle-income country, and there are about 450 million women in the reproductive age, where the word sex is a taboo. How do you reach this population? How do you speak the language? How do you make sure that you get to them? So one of the examples where you say the rubber hits the road, we have partnered with the UNFPA, United Nations Population Fund, and the Ministry of Health, and we have developed a chatbot where there will be complete, discreet communication with the young women who would need counseling. So they will be able to get unbranded education. This is part of the World Contraception Day and the your-life.com campaign that Bayer has been running. And the idea is, you want to make sure that you provide appropriate education. So this appropriate education transforms and translates into appropriate use of the relevant medication or prevention. If you are unable to reach this population, then they will not be able to get the information. 72% of micro-hold farmers in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia are females. Many of them get pregnant every 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
If you give them the chance and empower them with the knowledge that they could get, so they would be able to control their fertility to the way they see fit, this immediately reflects on the well-being of their health, on their families, and on the economy. If the mom decides that she's going to have a child only every 3, 4, 5 years, what have you, imagine how would that be reflected into her efficiency, effectiveness, and the well-being of her current family. So this is one example, and we have a couple of more examples where we have sponsored a Ghana Heart Initiative, and we were able to sponsor electronic medical record keeping, where now, for the first time, they are able to track not only the acute diseases like HIV, but then they have extended it into non-communicable diseases. And Bayer has been sponsoring this for the past 5 years with partners, NGOs like GIZ from Germany.
I think, André, you wanted to comment on this.
You know, somewhere what you said triggered a thought of speaking the language of your client.
Yeah.
You can make the analogy also speaking the language of biology and applying, for instance, AI and software to it. And Nisa mentioned the importance, because that actually has been perhaps the missing part in the years. I have a lot of experience outside biotech, where I have seen a lot of AI and also machine learning and software being applied. Like if you look at the phone in this industry, whereas in biology, it has been obviously very difficult because the understanding of biology is more complex, more dynamic.
Yes.
But now with, I would say, the computational power with AI, this is changing rapidly. And we have the opportunity to understand the biology and be able to actually produce programmable code-based medicine that actually exactly has an effect there where we want to have. And you can see the more Moderna example that way, because it was the mRNA that was basically creating the protein sequence that was creating the protein. Yeah. And then there is now another example that's Generate Biomedicine that directly creates the protein. And Nisa mentioned that doesn't exist in the world, actually. These are artificial proteins with a desired function. Yeah. And this can accelerate and revolutionize the way drug development works, and the speed of it, the cost of it, everything, basically.
But yes, the science is there, the technology is available. We've actually seen some real-life examples of this being delivered. One of the traditional hurdles to rapid delivery of new drugs, new treatments, is government regulation. Nisa, from your perspective, since you look at a sort of really broad view of things, are governments getting better? Are governments getting quicker? Are governments using these technologies, not just accepting that those technologies exist, but themselves using these technologies to speed up the process of authorization and allowing trials to speed up and basically get these magic treatments to us as fast as possible?
You know, that's interesting. I think, in the PrEP discussion, we talked about this. Clinical trial in the last 15 years has actually doubled in time, and it's also become more costly.
Yeah.
And I think one of the issues also we talked about, and this time it's very interesting, we brought a group of CEOs with us to MENA on this trip, because there was also a few healthcare conference. And we talked to different government organizations and exploring the possibility of, do we really need a lot of the developing countries, do we really need them to wait until US FDA approval, CE mark approval, until they actually approve the drugs? And I think same thing for Southeast Asia. We recently talked to the APAC, whether or not this is something that they would consider maybe actively also looking at approving first-in-class drugs at some point. So the ability to approve new drugs and innovative drugs in the different countries, if we can expedite that would actually be really great. Because one of the issues is we're also starting to see, and we have invested in digital clinical trial companies, and it's a company that's actually a spun off from IQVIA, so that we can help reduce the amount it takes a clinical trial, and then also so that we don't have to check all the data that perhaps would be incorrectly put together by certain hospitals and whatnot. So I think we're finding lots of different ways to try to expedite, especially since during COVID we saw an inequity for COVID vaccine. How can we expedite? And I think one of the theses for us investing always is how do we invest in companies that can develop affordable and innovative healthcare for the world. So,
are some countries, some governments better than others at this? Would you think of some countries as being best in class at speedy approval, speedy sort of permissions and?
Yes, definitely. I think U.S. FDA has always been the gold model, and then of course CE, EMEA, Japan, and so forth. But I do encourage, if the MENA countries want to become a biotech hub, perhaps the Ministry of Health can also think about developing and building a panel with that expertise.
Right.
If I may just bring us back again a little bit to the weeds, because this is absolutely for the spearhead of all the innovation. I share Dan's passion for having solutions that will be completely delivered through an iPhone or a phone. One of the learnings that we have found out through the Ghana Heart Initiative sponsorship over the years and the work in India, most of the time the healthcare providers, I mean, if there are investors out there who want to spend money well spent, they're using their own phones or iPads or something that would be incompatible with the electronic medical records that we try to help them develop. If someone would like to spend something on a development in a low middle income country, it could be a very simple solution. You don't need a space shuttle to go from Manhattan to New Jersey. A cab would be fine. A small computer here or there could make a big difference for a whole village or a whole community. Just bringing it back again to the weeds.
No, I appreciate that, because my question to both of you, but Dan, you could take this first if you like. What are the challenges at the other end in getting medical professionals to adapt to these new ideas and new technologies? I mean, I have this is very I'm simplifying this a little bit, but when I have conversations with my doctor in New York City, he's very skeptical about all of this AI. He's very old school, and he's an older gentleman, and he's familiar with ways of doing things. He's aware that these new things exist, but he's not interested. And if that's the case in New York City, what is the experience in developing countries, in far-flung places where medical professionals are few and far between?
Sure. I think going back to Sam's comment on you have to speak the language, whatever solutions needs to create value for everyone's involved. One part of it is the reimbursement. If there isn't a reimbursement for a new way of doing things, that reimbursement not only should cover the cost of the technology, but also should deliver value and basically money to the people that they're driving it. And historically, a lot of emphasis was, okay, we're going to get a reimbursement for the technology, and then doctors or nurses, they were like, we are putting time, no one pays for it. So speaking the language and having the considerations for the whole ecosystem is one part. But the most important part, and I think that is something that lots of technology companies, we all invent something and we expect people to adopt. We need to be mindful when you enter into a regulated, conservative industry, you better to bring a technology that is 10x better. If it is like 10% better, forget it. 40% better, forget it. And that's one of the things that, as we built Huma Cloud Platform, which got FDA approval and so on, we started thinking that half of the healthcare cost is the labor cost, which half of that is the doctors and nurses, let's say, going with the US stats. And is there a way, if I provide my technology, provide also a delightful experience? We partnered with Google 18, 19 months ago. We built new AI models based on the technologies that people now know, ChatGPT and so on, foundational model, to create a concept called 10x nurse, which is, I'm a nurse, using this technology right now, look after 200 patients. Can I look after 2,000 patients, working less?
Yes.
Not being bogged into all the bureaucracy, finding this data, that data, writing the report, and everything happens like this. And since we have rolled out the solutions in the US, we have seen a massive uptake. And for an experiment, you know, one of the philosophy we have at Huma is like, if you want to test if a feature works, turn it off to see if people get pissed off. If you turn off something and then suddenly you're getting a call, what happened? That means there is something in it. So to wrap your questions, the solutions that we create and the technology to be adopted, it has to bring a massive value. And it took us 10 years to get to here. And I believe we have actually another 20 years. When I started Huma, the vision always was a 30 years vision. Right. If you want to make the world the most advanced digital-first world for care and research, that is a 30 years journey.
We could have actually gone on talking all afternoon, but the clock is flashing. We are out of time. I will encourage the audience afterwards to reach out to all of the panelists, because there's a great deal more to be said here. But I'm glad that we were able to end, not just today, but this three-day event, this three-day forum, on such an optimistic and positive note. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel.